2 Saturdays ago, just after sunrise, a parade of fluorescent-vested HOA officers marched up to my ranch gate like they were storming a fortress. This was their 3rd visit in 2 weeks, and they'd brought reinforcements. Clipboards out, cameras up, barking orders for me to comply immediately. I didn't even stand up. I stirred my coffee, leaned against the fence post, and clicked the remote that armed the pressure sensors I'd quietly installed using old contractor equipment. They thought I was just some quiet rancher who wouldn't fight back. They had no clue I'd wired that gate to record every threat, every illegal move. When they demanded I open up, I said 4 words. Not today, not ever, but to understand why I turned that entrance into a weapon. You need to know 2 things: the boundary war my grandfather fought and won, and the iron rule he burned into me about never bowing to people who hide theft behind paperwork. Comment below where you're watching from. The land remembers everything. That's what my grandfather used to say when we walked the property line together, his boots crunching over pine needles and red clay. He'd stop at certain fence posts, run his hand along the split-rail oak, and tell me stories I thought were just old man rambling. Now I understand. The oak fence my grandfather built in 1962 still stands along the northern boundary, weathered gray but solid, marking the line he swore no one would ever cross. The spring-fed creek he dug channels for never runs dry, even when the county reservoir drops to dust. This soil is the color of rust and smells like rain even in August. My grandfather bought this land with money he saved from 30 years working at the lumber mill outside Eugene, back then. It was considered too remote, too hilly, too hard to develop. He didn't care. He wanted space that couldn't be taken. Space where no landlord, no bureaucrat, no opportunist could knock on the door and tell him to leave. He built the fence himself, post by post. Using oak he milled and wire he bought in town. He taught me how to set posts deep enough to survive winter frost heave, how to read a county plat map, and how to check property records at the clerk's office. He also taught me the one rule that mattered. Boundaries aren't just lines on a map, he said. They're where you decide who gets in and who stays out. If you don't defend that line, someone will cross it. And once they cross it, they'll claim it was never yours to begin with. I inherited the property when my parents passed 6 years ago. By then, I'd spent 2 decades working as an independent security contractor, wiring systems for small businesses and rural homes across 3 counties. I knew cameras, motion sensors, how to make a perimeter that would catch a coyote at midnight. When I moved back, I cleared overgrowth, repaired irrigation lines, planted an orchard of apples and pears. I sold produce at the farmer's market in town, built a small base of customers. The work was honest, and I stayed out of everyone's way. Then, about 4 months ago, I started noticing strangers walking near the boundary. Men in polo shirts and clean boots, holding tablets, taking photos. One morning I was checking the irrigation pump when I saw 3 of them standing just outside the fence, measuring something with a laser rangefinder. I walked over, kept my voice calm. "Can I help you?" One of them, a guy in his 30s with gelled hair, smiled. "Just surveying for the new development rezoning," he said, "updating the access corridor maps." I asked if they had permission to survey private land. He laughed. "This isn't entirely private anymore," he said. "It falls within the Westridge Estates expansion zone." I felt my jaw tighten but kept my face neutral. That was a lie, or at best a bureaucratic bluff. My deed was clear. No easements, no HOA covenants. I'd checked the title twice when I inherited. I told him to check his maps again. "This property has a clear title, fully registered with the county." He shrugged, tapped his tablet, and walked off. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured it was some county mix-up, something that would resolve itself. But the feeling stayed with me. That night, I sat on the porch, drinking coffee, listening to the wind move through the pines. The sound used to bring me peace. That night it felt like a warning, so I did what my grandfather would have done. I started preparing. I pulled out old security equipment from jobs I'd finished years before, trail cameras and motion sensors still in their boxes. I spent the next 2 weeks installing them around the property, focusing on the main gate and the fence sections closest to the county road. I ran the feeds to my laptop, set up alerts on my phone. Nothing elaborate, just coverage, just eyes that wouldn't lie. 2 weeks after I installed the cameras, I was sitting on the porch at dawn. Same spot, same coffee, watching light spill over the ridge. The air was cool. The sky streaked orange and purple. Then I heard it. Voices, multiple voices, sharp and loud, coming up the gravel drive. I stood, walked to the edge of the porch, and saw them. 5 people, all wearing bright yellow vests with Westridge HOA compliance printed across the back. They walked in formation, like a raid team, carrying clipboards and cameras. The front man, mid-40s, square jaw, slicked back hair, stopped at my gate and pointed at me. "You need to open this gate," he said. "We're here for a mandatory compliance inspection. Your property was flagged for boundary encroachment under the new Westridge rezoning ordinance." I didn't move. I sipped my coffee, let the silence stretch. There was no Westridge rezoning ordinance. Not one that applied to deeded land outside HOA jurisdiction. I knew because I'd spent 2 evenings at the county clerk's office confirming it. Then I said the only thing that mattered. "Show me your warrant." He didn't like that. The front man didn't like being asked for a warrant. His smile went flat, and he pulled a clipboard from under his arm like it was a badge. "We received multiple complaints," he said, "that your fence encroaches on the public access easement by 6 feet. You have 7 days to remove the section, or we'll authorize removal on your behalf." I set my coffee down on the porch rail, walked to the gate, and looked him in the eye. "My name's Ethan Walker," I said. "What's yours?" He hesitated, then straightened his shoulders. "Dennis Vaughn. I'm president of the Westridge Homeowners Association." I nodded. "Okay, Dennis. Show me the complaints. Show me the survey. Show me anything from the county land office that says my fence is illegal." He flipped through the pages on his clipboard, pulled out a single sheet, and held it up. It was a laser-printed document. No county seal, no notary stamp, no signature from any official. Just a header that said, "Westridge HOA Community Standards," and a paragraph about boundary compliance for collective infrastructure. I didn't touch the paper. I just looked at it, then looked back at him. "This isn't a legal document," I said. "This is something you printed at home." Dennis's face darkened. "We represent the community," he said. "We have the authority to enforce zoning standards within the Westridge district." I shook my head. "No, you don't. I have a clear property deed. My boundaries are recorded with the county clerk. There's no HOA covenant on this land. If you want to change my fence line, you need a court order or a decision from the county commissioner, not a printout." One of the men behind him, younger, wearing wraparound sunglasses, stepped forward. "You think you're special," he said. "You think you can block progress for everyone else?" I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on Dennis. "I'm not blocking anything," I said. "I'm asking you to follow the law. If there's a real issue, bring me real proof. Otherwise, you're trespassing." Dennis's jaw tightened. He wrote something on his clipboard, slow and deliberate, like he wanted me to see the threat. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "We're trying to work with you here. If you refuse to cooperate, there will be consequences." I felt my pulse tick up but kept my voice level. "I'm not refusing to cooperate," I said. "I'm refusing you. There's a difference." He stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the road. The others followed, glancing back, muttering to each other. I stood at the gate until they disappeared around the bend. Then I pulled out my phone and called the only lawyer I trusted. Her name was Margaret Hayes, 55 years old, sharp as broken glass, specializing in property disputes. I'd worked with her years back when a neighbor tried to claim an easement through my creek access. She answered on the second ring. "Ethan," she said, "what's going on?" I told her everything. The surveyors 4 months ago, the vests, the fake document, Dennis's threat. She was quiet for a moment, then sighed. "Sounds like a land grab," she said. Probably a developer leaning on locals to sell cheap, or a self-appointed HOA trying to leverage fake authority for kickbacks. Either way, they have zero legal standing, but they'll escalate. I asked her what I should do. She gave me 3 rules. 1. Keep every piece of paper they give you. 2. Record every interaction, audio and video. 3. If they do anything physical, call the sheriff immediately and file a report. Don't engage, don't threaten, don't give them a reason to twist the narrative. I thanked her, hung up, and walked back to the house. That evening I sat in the living room with my laptop open, reviewing the camera footage from the morning. I watched Dennis and his crew approach the gate, watched them gesture at the fence, watched them argue among themselves after I sent them away. I saved the files, backed them up to 2 external drives, and uploaded copies to cloud storage. Then I pulled out a notebook and started a timeline: date, time, who was present, what was said, and what documents they showed. I wrote down Margaret's instructions word for word. I labeled a folder evidence and put everything inside. My grandfather used to say that memory fades, but paper doesn't. He was right. Now we had something better. Cameras that never blinked and files that couldn't burn. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept thinking about Dennis's face, the way he smiled when he said there would be consequences. I'd seen that look before, in contractors who thought they could bully their way through code inspections, in landlords who thought tenants had no recourse. It was the look of someone who believed power came from volume and persistence, not law. But I'd also seen those people lose. I'd seen them sit in small claims court, stammering. When a judge asked for documentation they didn't have, I told myself this would be the same. As long as I stayed calm, stayed legal, stayed one step ahead. The wind moved through the pines outside my window. I closed my eyes and listened. The land remembers, I thought. And now, so do the cameras. 2 days after Dennis left my gate, I woke up to a text from a customer at the farmer's market. "Hey, Ethan, what's going on? Someone's saying you're blocking a community project." I sat up, opened my phone, and searched the local community forum. There it was, a post from an account called Westridge Concerned Residents, with a photo of my gate taken from the road. The caption read, "Local property owner refuses to comply with safety ordinance, blocking emergency access route for entire neighborhood. Residents deserve better." The post had 60 comments. Half were people asking for context. The other half were already calling me selfish, reckless, a threat to public safety. None of them knew my name. None of them had seen my deed. They just saw a story that fit their anger. I scrolled through the comments, my jaw tight. Someone asked what ordinance was being violated. The original poster replied with a link to the fake document Dennis had shown me, now uploaded as a PDF. It looked official if you didn't know what to check for. No county seal, no case number, no legal citation, just confident formatting and bureaucratic language. I typed a reply explaining that the document wasn't legitimate, that my property had a clear title, that there was no HOA authority over deeded land. I attached a photo of my recorded plat map from the county clerk's office. I hit post. 10 minutes later, my comment was gone, replaced with a moderation notice claiming I'd violated community guidelines. I screenshot the deletion, saved everything to the evidence folder, and called Margaret. She answered on the first ring. "They're smearing you," she said before I even spoke. "I saw the post. Don't engage online. They control that space. Let them talk. What matters is the legal record, not the internet." "But people believe this stuff," I said. "My customers are seeing it." She exhaled. "I know. But if you fight them in their arena, you lose. They'll delete you, twist your words, and make you look unstable. Stay quiet. Keep documenting. And when the time comes, we'll show a judge exactly what they did." I hung up. But the anger didn't fade. I'd spent 6 years building trust in this community. Now, a stranger with a clipboard was erasing it with lies. That afternoon, I was in the orchard checking the irrigation drip lines when I heard voices at the gate again. I walked back toward the house and saw a group of about 12 people standing outside the fence. They weren't wearing vests this time, just regular clothes, holding signs. One read, "Community over greed." Another said, "Stop the encroachment." They weren't chanting, just standing there, filming with their phones. A van from the farmers market co-op pulled up to make a delivery and had to wait while they cleared the driveway. The driver looked at me through the windshield, confused. I walked to the gate, kept my distance, and spoke calmly. "You're blocking access," I said. "You need to move." A woman in her 40s with a clipboard, not Dennis this time, stepped forward. "We have a right to peacefully protest," she said. "This is a public easement." I shook my head. "This is a county road, county maintained, but not designated as an easement on any recorded plat." She knew it. I could see it in the way her eyes shifted. I pulled out my phone, called the sheriff's non-emergency line, and reported an obstruction. The dispatcher said a deputy would come by within the hour. The group didn't leave until the deputy arrived. By then, they'd been there 90 minutes. The delivery driver had to cancel and reschedule. When Deputy Martinez showed up, he asked them to disperse. They did. Slowly, filming him the whole time. He walked over to me after they left, took my statement, and wrote down names from the signs they'd left behind. "You want to file a report?" he asked. I nodded. Yes. Harassment and interference with business access. He made notes, told me to call immediately if they came back, and drove off. I stood at the gate long after he left, watching the road. The sun was setting. I knew this wasn't over. At 2:17 a.m. The motion alert jolted me awake. I grabbed my phone, opened the camera app, and saw 3 figures moving along the fence line near the back corner of the property, farthest from the house. They were wearing dark clothes, faces covered. One of them had bolt cutters. I heard the snap of metal through the phone speaker before I saw it. A sharp crack like a branch breaking. He clipped through the fence wire in 4 places, pulling the section loose. Another one kicked at a fence post. The wood groaned, resisted, then splintered at the base. I didn't go outside. I called 911, gave my address, and described what I was seeing in real time. The dispatcher kept me on the line. "Deputies are on the way," she said. "Stay inside. Do not confront them." I didn't. I just watched, recorded the timestamp, and waited. By the time I heard sirens in the distance, the 3 figures were already running back toward the tree line. The deputies searched the area but didn't find them. They took photos of the damage, collected the cut wire as evidence, filed a report for criminal mischief and trespassing. I spent the rest of the night on the porch with all the lights on, unable to shut my mind off. The fence could be fixed. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that someone had decided my boundaries didn't matter. My refusal to comply permitted them to break the law, and the scariest part was how organized it felt. The post, the protest, the vandalism. This wasn't random. This was a campaign. I opened my laptop, pulled up the evidence folder, and started adding files, video of the vandals, photos of the damage, Deputy Martinez's report number. The timeline was getting longer. Margaret had been right. They would escalate, and I needed to be ready for whatever came next. The morning after the vandalism, I didn't fix the fence right away. I left it exactly as it was, wire cut and hanging, post splintered at the base, and took 43 photos from every angle in full daylight. I measured the cuts with a tape measure, documented the tool marks, collected the severed wire pieces, and bagged them with timestamps written in marker. Margaret had told me once that evidence isn't just what happened. It's how well you can prove it happened. I was building a case that couldn't be dismissed. I uploaded everything to cloud storage, burned copies to 2 external drives, and added the files to the timeline. Then I called a security company in Eugene and ordered 4 additional cameras, higher resolution, with infrared night vision and audio recording. They arrived the next day. I installed them myself, angling coverage to eliminate blind spots along the entire perimeter. While I worked, I started thinking about what Dennis had said during that first visit. We received multiple complaints. That phrase kept circling back. Complaints from who I didn't have neighbors within a quarter mile. The nearest houses were part of a small subdivision 2 roads over, and I'd never had issues with any of them. I decided to find out. I drove to the county clerk's office, the same building where I'd confirmed my plat map months earlier, and requested copies of any formal complaints filed against my property in the past year. The clerk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain, searched the system and shook her head. "Nothing on file," she said. "If there were complaints about zoning or boundary issues, they'd be logged here. You're clean." I asked her to print a statement confirming that. She did. I walked out with an official county document, stamped and dated, proving that Dennis's entire premise was a lie. Next, I went to see Margaret at her office in town. I brought the evidence folder, now over 60 pages, printed and organized in a binder with tabs. Photos, timestamps, deputy reports, forum screenshots, the fake HOA document, the county clerk's statement. She sat at her desk, flipping through it slowly, nodding. "This is good," she said. "This is very good. You've documented a pattern of harassment, trespass, vandalism, and fraud. If they keep pushing, we can file for a restraining order and a civil suit. But I want to go further." I pulled out my phone, showed her the audio I'd started recording during the second confrontation with Dennis. Oregon is a one-party consent state. I can record any conversation I'm part of without telling the other person. She smiled. "Yes, you can. And if they threaten you again, that recording becomes evidence of criminal intimidation." I asked what the next step was. She leaned back in her chair. "We wait," she said. "Let them make the next move. They're escalating because you're not breaking. Eventually, they'll do something that crosses a legal line we can't ignore. And when they do, we'll have everything we need to bury them." That evening, I sat on the porch with a notepad and started mapping out what I knew. Dennis Vaughn, self-appointed HOA president. No legitimate authority. No registered nonprofit. No county recognition. The fake compliance document. The forum smear campaign. The protest that blocked my delivery. The nighttime vandalism. I drew lines connecting each event, noting dates and participants. Then I wrote down the question that mattered most. Why? Why this much effort for 12 acres that weren't even in their jurisdiction? The answer came to me slowly. This wasn't about my fence. It was about my land. Someone wanted it. And Dennis was the tool being used to pressure me into selling cheap or abandoning the property altogether. I opened my laptop and started searching public records for Westridge Estates. It wasn't hard to find. A planned residential development proposed 3 years ago, stalled due to financing issues, has recently been revived under new ownership. The developer was a company called Redwood Development Corp. I dug deeper. Redwood had purchased 18 parcels in the area over the past 2 years, all adjacent to or near my property. My 12 acres sat right in the middle of their footprint. If I sold, they'd have a contiguous block. If I didn't, I was a hole in their plan. I screenshot the property maps, the corporate filings, the development proposal submitted to the county. Then I found something even better. A business registry search showed that Dennis Vaughn was listed as a paid consultant for Redwood Development Corp. He wasn't a concerned neighbor. He was on their payroll. I saved everything, added it to the binder, and called Margaret. She answered immediately. "You need to hear this," I said. I told her what I'd found. She was quiet for a moment, then laughed. Sharp and bitter. "They're not even hiding it well," she said. "That's actionable. If Dennis is acting as an agent for a developer while pretending to represent a community group, that's fraud, misrepresentation, and possibly extortion. We can take this to the county prosecutor." I asked if we had enough. "Not yet," she said. "We need one more thing. We need him to admit it, or we need someone on the inside to confirm it." I thought about the protest, the people holding signs, the woman with the clipboard. Not all of them could be in on it. Some of them probably believed the lies. And if one of them realized they'd been used, they might talk. I spent the next 2 days reinforcing the damaged fence, installing the new cameras, and running diagnostic checks on every sensor. I tested the motion alerts, adjusted the angles, and made sure the audio was clear. I also bought a small handheld voice recorder, the kind journalists use, and started keeping it in my shirt pocket whenever I left the house. Margaret was right. We were waiting for the next move. But I wasn't waiting passively. I was building a fortress of evidence, brick by brick, timestamp by timestamp, and when Dennis or his crew came back, I'd be ready, not with violence, not with threats, with documentation so airtight that no judge, no jury, no county official could ignore it. My grandfather used to say that the truth was a weapon if you knew how to sharpen it. I was sharpening mine. 4 days after I found Dennis's name in the Redwood corporate filings, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was blank. The message was short. I live in Westridge. I know what they're doing to you. It's not what they told us. I have documents. Can we meet? The sender signed it only with initials. SP. I stared at the screen for a long time, weighing the possibilities. It could be a trap, bait to get me to say something incriminating or lose my temper. It could also be exactly what Margaret said we needed. Someone on the inside is willing to talk. I forwarded the email to Margaret, asked her opinion. She called me 5 minutes later. Meet in public, she said. Daytime. Somewhere with witnesses. Record everything. Bring nothing that can be stolen or damaged, if it feels wrong. Walk away. I replied to the email with a location and time. Downtown coffee shop. Next afternoon. 2 p.m. I arrived 15 minutes early, parked where I could see the entrance, and turned on the voice recorder in my pocket. The coffee shop was busy. Students on laptops, retirees reading newspapers. At exactly 2 p.m. a woman walked in, mid-50s, gray hair pulled back, tired eyes. She scanned the room, saw me sitting by the window, and walked over. "Are you Ethan?" she asked quietly. I nodded. She sat down, hands folded on the table, and took a breath. "My name is Susan Price. I've lived in Westridge for 6 years. I was at the protest outside your gate. I held one of the signs. I didn't know what I was doing." Her voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry." I kept my expression neutral, my voice calm. "Why are you here?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table between us. "Because I found out they lied to us," she said. "Dennis told us you were blocking an emergency access road, that you refused to cooperate with safety upgrades, and that the county had flagged your property. He showed us the same document he showed you, the fake ordinance. We believed him. But 2 weeks ago, I went to the county planning office to ask about the timeline for the road project. They had no idea what I was talking about. There is no emergency access project. There never was." I felt my pulse quicken but kept my face still. "What's in the folder?" She slid it across. "Copies of internal emails," she said. "I'm part of the Westridge Communication Group. Dennis sends updates, meeting notes, and funding requests. I started saving them after I talked to the county. Look at the one from 3 months ago." I opened the folder. The first page was a printed email chain. The subject line read, Phase 2 Land Acquisition. The sender was Dennis Vaughn. The recipient list included 4 other names I didn't recognize, and one I did. Michael Driscoll, listed as VP of Acquisitions at Redwood Development Corp. The email was blunt. The Walker property remains non-compliant. Recommend escalation to forced sale or abandonment. Coordinating community pressure campaign and compliance theater. Anticipate resolution within 60 days. I read it twice. Let the words settle. This wasn't just fraud. This was a conspiracy. I looked up at Susan. "How many people know about this?" She shook her head. "Just me, as far as I know. Most of the residents believe Dennis. He's convincing. He talks about property values, neighborhood safety, collective good. People want to believe they're part of something positive. They don't ask questions." I flipped through the rest of the folder. There were meeting minutes from HOA sessions that were never officially recorded. A budget spreadsheet showing payments from Redwood to Dennis labeled as consulting fees, and a list of properties Redwood had targeted. Mine was 4th on the list. The first 3 had all sold within 6 months of being approached. I asked Susan why she was giving this to me. She looked down at her hands. "Because what they're doing is wrong," she said. I moved here to get away from exactly this kind of thing. People use fake authority to bully others. I thought the HOA was legitimate. I thought we were helping. When I realized we weren't, I couldn't stay quiet. I have kids. I don't want them growing up thinking this is how you treat people. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't cry. I just need to know if this matters, that it's not for nothing. I closed the folder, met her gaze. It matters, I said. This is everything I needed. With this, we can prove Dennis was acting as an agent for Redwood, that the HOA was a front, and that the harassment was coordinated. This is evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. She exhaled, relief visible in her shoulders. What happens now? I told her I'd give the documents to my attorney, that we'd likely file complaints with the county prosecutor and possibly a civil suit. I asked if she'd be willing to testify if it came to that. She nodded. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. I thanked her, told her to keep copies of everything, to stay safe, and to contact me or Margaret immediately if Dennis or anyone else approached her. She stood, hesitated, then said one more thing. There's a meeting next week. Westridge HOA. Public session at the community center. Dennis is planning to present a resolution about your property. He's going to ask for a vote to authorize legal action against you. I wrote down the date and time. Thank you, I said. She nodded and left. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, the folder in front of me, the recorder still running in my pocket. This was the turning point, the moment the case shifted from defense to offense. I had the proof. I had the timeline. I had a witness willing to go on record. And now I had something else. A public meeting where Dennis would walk into a room full of people and lie, not knowing that I'd already dismantled every word he was going to say. I picked up the folder, walked out to my truck, and called Margaret. We need to talk, I said. Right now. Margaret and I spent 3 days preparing for the public meeting. We built a presentation, clean and methodical, with every piece of evidence labeled and time-stamped. The fake ordinance, the county clerk's statement confirming no complaints existed. The screenshots from the forum show my deleted comments. Deputy reports vandalism, photos of the cut fence. The corporate filings link Dennis to Redwood. And the centerpiece, Susan's folder. The emails, the budget spreadsheet, the target list. Margaret printed hard copies, loaded digital backups onto a thumb drive, and rehearsed with me how to present without emotion. Stick to facts, she said. Let the evidence speak. Don't argue, don't accuse, just show. When people see the truth laid out clearly, they'll turn on him themselves. The meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. at the Westridge Community Center, a small building with a meeting hall that held about 80 people. Margaret warned me it would be hostile. Dennis controlled the narrative there. Most attendees would arrive thinking I was the problem. That was fine. I wasn't there to win a popularity contest. I was there to end this. We arrived at 6:45. The parking lot was nearly full. I carried a folder under one arm, and Margaret carried her briefcase. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a long table at the front where Dennis sat with 3 others, all wearing polo shirts with Westridge HOA board embroidered on the chest. Dennis saw me walk in and his face went carefully blank. He leaned over, whispered something to the man next to him. I took a seat in the back row. Margaret sat beside me. The room filled quickly. I recognized faces from the protest. Some glared, others looked curious. Susan was sitting near the middle, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. At exactly 7 p.m. Dennis stood, tapped the microphone, and called the meeting to order. Good evening, everyone, he said, voice smooth and practiced. Thank you for coming. Tonight we'll be addressing an ongoing compliance issue that affects the safety and property values of our entire community. He clicked a remote. A projector screen behind him lit up with a photo of my gate. This property, he continued, has refused repeated requests to comply with county safety ordinances regarding emergency vehicle access, despite multiple notices and opportunities to cooperate. The owner has chosen to obstruct progress and put all of us at risk. Tonight, we'll be voting on whether to authorize the HOA to pursue legal remedies on behalf of the community. He paused, letting the room murmur. I felt Margaret's hand briefly touch my arm. A silent reminder. Wait. Dennis continued for another 5 minutes, painting a picture of me as a reckless, selfish landowner endangering the neighborhood. He showed the fake ordinance document on the screen, talked about emergency response times, and mentioned property values 3 times. When he finished, he opened the floor for questions. Hands went up immediately. One man asked how much legal action would cost. Dennis deflected smoothly. Minimal, he said. We have pro bono support. Another woman asked if the county had actually issued a formal order. Dennis smiled. The documentation is all here, he said, gesturing vaguely at the screen. I stood up. Dennis's smile faltered. I raised my hand. He hesitated, then pointed at me with obvious reluctance. Yes, I walked to the front of the room, slowly, folder in hand. My name is Ethan Walker, I said. I'm the property owner you've been talking about. I'd like to respond. Dennis's jaw tightened. This is a member meeting, he said. You're not a member. Margaret stood. Under Oregon public meeting law, any affected party has the right to address claims made in a public forum. If you deny him that right, you're opening yourself to legal liability. Dennis looked at the others at the table. No one spoke. He sat down, arms crossed. Fine, 5 minutes. I turned to face the room. I didn't need 5 minutes. I started with the simplest fact. There is no county safety ordinance, I said. I placed a printed copy of the county clerk's statement on the table in front of Dennis. That document confirms that no formal complaints have been filed against my property. The ordinance you've been showing people doesn't exist. It was created by Dennis Vaughn and has no legal authority. The room went quiet. I turned to the screen, pulled out my thumb drive, and asked Dennis if I could use the projector. He didn't move. Margaret walked over, ejected his drive, and inserted mine. The first image appeared. The fake ordinance. Side by side with a real county document. No seal, no case number, no signature, just formatting. I let people look at it for 10 seconds. Then I advanced to the next slide. A photo of the forum post, the accusations, the deleted comments. I read the moderation note aloud. Then I showed my original comment, complete with timestamps and screenshots proving it was removed without cause. Next, I showed the photos of the vandalism. 3 people, bolt cutters, 2 at 17 a.m. I showed the deputy the report, the case number, and the criminal mischief classification. Then I advanced to the corporate filings. Redwood Development Corp. Purchased 18 parcels in 2 years. My property, outlined in red, is sitting in the middle. Then the business registry. Dennis Vaughn, consultant, monthly retainer. The room erupted. People started talking over each other. Dennis stood, face red. That's taken out of context, he said loudly. I'm a volunteer. I don't profit from this. I didn't argue. I just advanced to the next slide. The email Susan had given me. Phase 2 land acquisition. The Walker property remains non-compliant. Recommend escalation to forced sale or abandonment. Coordinating community pressure campaign and compliance theater. I read it aloud, slowly. Every word. The sender, Dennis Vaughn. The recipient, Michael Driscoll. VP of Acquisitions, Redwood Development Corp. The silence that followed was absolute. Dennis opened his mouth, closed it, and opened it again. That email is private, he finally said. You had no right to access it. Margaret stepped forward. It was provided by a member of your communication group who recognized it as evidence of fraud, she said. And it's now part of a formal complaint filed with the county prosecutor's office this morning. Dennis went pale. The man next to him at the table stood abruptly, walked out. Another followed. Susan stood from her seat in the middle of the room. I was part of the protest, she said, voice shaking but clear. Dennis told us Ethan was blocking emergency access. He showed us the fake ordinance. I believed him. A lot of us did. But he lied. I went to the county. There's no project. There never was. This was about forcing a sale so Redwood could buy the land cheaply. We were used. The room exploded, people shouting, some at Dennis. some at each other. One woman stood and pointed at the screen. "You told us our property values were at risk," she said. "You told us this was for our safety." Dennis raised his hands. "Everyone, calm down," he said. "This is a misunderstanding. Let me explain." No one let him explain. A man in the front row demanded to see the HOA's financial records. Another asked if Dennis had been paid for any of the other properties Redwood bought. A third stood and said he was calling the sheriff. Margaret leaned close to me. "We're done here," she said quietly. "Let it burn." We walked toward the exit. As we reached the door, Dennis shouted after me. "You think you've won?" he said, voice cracking. "You think this is over?" I stopped, turned, and looked at him across the chaos. "It's been over since you showed up at my gate with a fake document," I said. "You just didn't know it yet." Outside, the air was cool and clear. I could still hear shouting from inside the building. Margaret smiled, sharp and satisfied. "That," she said, "is how you dismantle a liar. Not with anger, with receipts." I nodded, exhausted but steady. We walked to our trucks. My phone buzzed. A text from Susan. "Thank you." I replied with 2 words. "Thank you." I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, engine off, watching people stream out of the community center. Some looked angry, some looked shocked. A few looked ashamed. Dennis came out last, alone, head down, walking fast toward his car. No one followed him. No one called his name. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. But I also felt something else. The weight I'd been carrying for months. The constant vigilance. The fear that I'd lose my land to lies. It was lifting. Not gone. Not yet. But lighter. I started the engine and drove home. 3 days after the meeting, the county prosecutor's office opened a formal investigation. Margaret had filed the complaint on Monday morning, before we even walked into the community center, attaching every document we had. The prosecutor assigned it to a senior investigator who called me on Tuesday afternoon. His name was Davis, a former sheriff's deputy with 20 years in criminal investigation. He asked if I could come in and walk him through the timeline. I brought the binder, the drives, everything. We sat in his office for 2 hours. He took notes, asked specific questions about dates and participants, and requested copies of the emails Susan had provided. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair and shook his head. "This is one of the cleaner cases I've seen," he said. "Usually we're digging for evidence. You handed us a roadmap." "How long until charges?" I asked. He shrugged. "Depends on how cooperative people are. We'll start with interviews. If Vaughn's smart, he'll get a lawyer and keep quiet. If he's not, he'll try to talk his way out and make it worse." Dennis wasn't smart. 4 days later, Margaret called me with an update. Investigator Davis had brought Dennis in for questioning. Dennis showed up without a lawyer, thinking he could charm his way through it. Instead, he spent 90 minutes contradicting himself, admitting to the consulting payments, claiming they were legitimate, then trying to deny the emails were his. By the end, he'd implicated himself in fraud, criminal conspiracy, and intimidation. Margaret sounded almost gleeful. "He tied his own noose," she said. "The prosecutor is moving forward with charges. I asked about the others, the people who'd helped him. She said 2 had already agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. They gave statements confirming Dennis organized the protest, hired people to vandalize the fence, and controlled the forum moderation. One of them admitted he was the person in the dark clothes with the bolt cutters. He'd been paid $300 cash. The formal charges came down 2 weeks later. Dennis Vaughn was arrested at his home early on a Thursday morning and charged with 3 felonies. Fraud in the 2nd degree, for misrepresenting authority and fabricating official documents. Conspiracy to commit extortion, for the coordinated campaign to force my sale. Criminal mischief in the 1st degree, for orchestrating property damage. The extortion charge carried 3 to 5 years. The fraud charge carried 2 to 7 years. Combined with the conspiracy enhancement, Dennis was looking at a minimum of 5 years in prison if convicted. His 2 accomplices, the ones who'd participated in the vandalism and the protest blocking, were charged with misdemeanors, criminal trespass, harassment, and mischief in the third degree. They faced up to a year each and were ordered to pay restitution. The amount was calculated based on my documented losses: repair costs for the fence, installation costs for the additional cameras, lost business from the canceled deliveries, and legal fees. The total came to $32,000. Margaret also filed a civil suit on my behalf against both Dennis and Redwood Development Corp. The complaint alleged fraudulent misrepresentation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, abuse of process, and civil conspiracy. We weren't just asking for damages. We were asking for punitive penalties, attorney's fees, and an injunction barring Redwood from any further contact with me or attempts to acquire my property. Redwood's legal team reached out within 48 hours, trying to negotiate a settlement. Margaret told them we'd consider it after discovery, which meant after we got to subpoena all their internal communications. They went quiet after that. The county also launched an administrative review of the Westridge HOA. Turned out it had never been properly registered as a nonprofit, never filed required financial disclosures, and never held legitimate elections. The county dissolved it, froze its bank accounts pending an audit, and sent letters to every property owner in the area clarifying that the organization had no legal authority and never had. Several residents, including Susan, filed complaints with the state attorney general's office asking for a broader investigation into HOA fraud. The local press picked up the story a week after the charges were filed. A reporter from the county paper called me, asked for an interview. I agreed, but only if Margaret was present. We met at the same coffee shop where Susan had given me the folder. The reporter, a guy in his 30s named Jake Morrison, recorded the conversation and took notes. I walked him through the timeline, showed him copies of the documents, and explained how the pressure campaign worked. He asked good questions. How did you stay calm? Why didn't you fight back physically? What do you want people to know? I told him the truth. I stayed calm because losing my temper would have given them exactly what they wanted, a reason to paint me as unstable. I didn't fight back because I didn't need to. The law was on my side, and I trusted it. What I want people to know is that when someone tries to bully you with fake authority, the answer isn't violence, it's documentation, paper, timestamps, witnesses, and recordings. Truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be accurate. The article ran on the front page of the Sunday edition. The headline read, "Local Rancher Exposes Developer Fraud Through Evidence and Persistence." It included photos of my property, excerpts from the emails, and quotes from Investigator Davis confirming the charges. The story was picked up by regional outlets, shared widely online. I started getting emails and messages from people I didn't know. Some were other landowners who'd faced similar pressure from fake HOAs or aggressive developers. Some were just people saying they respected how I handled it. One message stood out. It was from an elderly man 2 counties over who said a group had tried the same thing on him 5 years ago. He'd sold his land for a fraction of its value because he didn't know how to fight back. He thanked me for showing there was another way. A month after the charges were filed, Dennis pleaded guilty to avoid trial. His lawyer negotiated the sentence down to 4 years in state prison, with credit for time served and eligibility for parole after 2. The 2 accomplices pleaded no contest to misdemeanors, were sentenced to 6 months each with the possibility of early release, and ordered to pay their share of restitution immediately. Redwood Development Corp. settled the civil suit out of court. Terms were confidential, but Margaret told me it was enough to cover everything and then some. More importantly, the settlement included a permanent injunction. Redwood could never contact me, could never make an offer on my property, and had to formally withdraw their development proposal for the area surrounding my land. The county rezoned the parcels they'd already bought back to agricultural use. The hole in their plan stayed a hole. 6 months after the settlement, I rebuilt the fence, not because it needed rebuilding. The repairs I'd made after the vandalism were solid, but because I wanted to do it right. I wanted to build something that would last another 60 years, the way my grandfather's original fence had. I ordered new oak posts, milled locally, treated for weather resistance. I bought heavier gauge wire, galvanized to prevent rust. I spent 3 weeks working on it, digging post holes deeper than required, setting each post in concrete, running the wire with tension that wouldn't sag in winter. Susan came by one Saturday morning with her 2 kids, a boy and a girl, maybe 10 and 12. She asked if they could help. I handed them gloves, showed them how to hold the wire while I fastened it, how to check the level on a post. We worked quietly, the sound of hammers and wind through the pines. When we finished the north section, Susan stood back and looked at it. "That's a good fence," she said. I nodded. "It's a boundary. That's all it ever needed to be." The orchard came back stronger than before. The apple trees I'd planted 6 years ago were finally producing full harvests, and the pears were close behind. I expanded the garden beds, added rows of berries, and started keeping bees in 3 hives near the creek. The farmers' market customers returned, some with apologies, some just with money and small talk. I didn't hold grudges. Most of them had been lied to. Same like Susan, they weren't the enemy. They were just people who believed a story because it sounded official. I understood that. What mattered now was the work. The land didn't care about vindication or victory. It only cared about care. Water, soil, seasons, time. I gave it all 4. Margaret called me one afternoon in late summer with news. The state attorney general's office had opened a wider investigation into fraudulent HOAs operating across Oregon. They were using my case as a reference point, a model for how these schemes worked and how to prosecute them. She said they wanted to know if I'd be willing to speak at a workshop they were organizing for rural landowners, teaching them how to recognize fake authority and protect their property rights. I thought about it for a day, then said yes, not because I wanted attention, but because I remembered the email from the elderly man 2 counties over, the one who'd sold his land because he didn't know how to fight. If I could keep that from happening to someone else, it was worth an afternoon. The workshop was held at a county extension office, about 40 people in folding chairs, most of them older, all of them looking tired in a way I recognized. I stood at the front with Margaret beside me and told the story. Not the dramatic parts, not the confrontation or the trial. I focused on the practical steps. How to verify documents by checking for seals and case numbers. How to request records from the county clerk. How to document interactions with photos, recordings, and timestamps. How to recognize when someone is bluffing with fake authority. When I finished, a woman in the back raised her hand. "How did you stay calm?" she asked. "Everyone wants to know that." I thought about it. "Honestly," I said, "I stayed calm because I knew anger would cost me the fight. The moment I lost control, I'd give them a story they could use against me. So I turned the anger into something else. Preparation. Every time I wanted to yell, I took a photo instead. Every time I wanted to confront them, I called my lawyer instead. I made my anger useful. The room was quiet. Then someone started clapping. Others joined. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just nodded and sat down. On the drive home, I stopped at the cemetery where my grandfather was buried. I hadn't been there in months. His headstone was simple, just his name and the years he lived. I stood there for a while, hands in my pockets, looking at the dates. "You were right," I said quietly, "about the boundaries, about the paper, about not bowing to people who hide theft behind rules. I kept the land. I kept it the way you would have, not with a fight, with patience." The wind picked up, moving through the trees around the cemetery. I took it as an answer. Back at the property, I walked the fence line one more time, checking the posts, the tension in the wire, the gates. Everything was solid. The cameras were still running, the motion alert still active, but I didn't check them as often anymore. The threat was gone. Dennis was in prison. Redwood was barred. The fake HOA was dissolved. What remained was what had always been there. 12 acres of red clay soil, oak and pine, a creek that never stopped running, and a boundary that meant something. Not because it kept people out, but because it marked where I chose to make a stand. That night, I sat on the porch, same spot where I'd been sitting the morning Dennis first showed up. The air was cool, the stars visible through gaps in the clouds. I thought about all the things that had happened since that morning. The lies, the pressure, the vandalism, the evidence, the trial, the resolution. It felt distant now, like something that had happened to someone else, but it hadn't. It had happened to me, and I'd won. Not with violence, not with rage, with documents, witnesses, and the law. A car came up the gravel drive, headlights cutting through the dark. It was Susan, dropping off a basket of vegetables from her garden. She didn't stay long, just handed it over, smiled, and left. I set the basket on the porch rail and looked out at the land. The fence line was barely visible in the twilight, but I knew it was there. Solid, clear, defended. My grandfather had been right about one more thing. The land remembers. And now it remembered this. Those boundaries hold when you refuse to let them fall. Boundaries matter, not just on land, but in life. If this story reminded you that standing your ground doesn't require violence, just evidence and patience, then it served its purpose. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, or share a time you had to defend what was yours. And if you know someone dealing with fake authority or neighborhood pressure right now, send them this. Sometimes the best weapon is knowing you're not alone. Hit subscribe for more stories where the quiet ones win. See you at the next one. Bye.